Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
All right, we'll get going with the questions now. The first question is for House Bill 1123. House Bill 1123. Question asks, what should... Uh-oh, microphone issues. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, what should be the legal response when intellectually disabled people or severely mentally ill people commit crimes? Can we spare them the death penalty? Again, it's House Bill 1123. Who would like to start on this one? Representative Steinhauer.
That is yes.
Okay.
Did you hear that?
Representative Smith.
The question was,
Go
can we
ahead,
spare
Representative Steinhauer.
mentally challenged people from the death penalty? And I believe the answer to that is yes. I voted for this bill.
Okay. Representative Smith.
Thank you. I would agree with Representative Steinhauer, and I voted that same way.
Anyone else want to talk on this topic? Representative Colbeck, or Senator Colbeck.
Yeah, I'm a sponsor on this bill.
Oh, hang on. I have microphone issues again. Is it working? Is it working? Technical problems, hang on there.
I'm a sponsor on this bill as well, and when this bill comes over to the Senate, I will be in favor of this.
All right. Anyone else? Move on to the next question, which is on Senate Bill 159. The question asks, will you support Senate Bill 159 to start reducing food tax? We were told at the time the legislature passed the streamlined sales tax rules, which prepared the state to collect tax on online sales, that sales tax would go down when that revenue started to come in. So the question is, will you support Senate Bill 159? Representative Smith.
I do support that. I think the food tax is a regressive tax. We do have to balance when we reduce taxes in one area, we have to find money in another area. But I do think that as South Dakotans, we should be concerned about that, and removing the tax from food would be the right thing to do.
Senator Pierre.
I'm going to kind of go into a little bit different direction on this particular one. First, the sales tax law in this area, not talking about food, we're already, when we start collecting online sales tax, if we win our court case in April, we made it, for those of you who don't know, we are currently in the middle of a major court case that made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, one of the fastest court cases to make it to the U.S. Supreme Court in history. We made it in less than 23 months in order to collect online retail sales tax. That's a direct challenge of the 1992 North Dakota versus Quill decision, and if that were to happen, when we put in the sales tax increase a couple of years ago to pay teachers more, included in that piece of legislation was already a ratcheting down of our online sales, or ratcheting down of our sales tax increase in order to just reduce the taxes that we would already be collecting. So we're offsetting it already. So if we're going to do this, you have to take away the ratcheting effect as well. So I haven't read this particular piece of legislation, but we already have it in statute where as the online revenues come in, we reduce the tax rate already. So we would have to maneuver a little bit more, and I don't know if Senate Bill 159 addresses that area of law.
Thank you. Representative Nicholson?
This is an idea that it sounds pretty appealing, but in South Dakota, you do have to find an alternative. And so it's an idea that would probably hold broad appeal, but at the same time, what will we replace the revenue with, or what will we cut if we're going to get out of it? Because it's a pretty significant source of revenue. And as a way of backdrop, I would just say the general tax burden at the state level in South Dakota per person that lives in this state is the second lowest in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? We will move on to House Bill 1184. House Bill 1184. The question asks, do you support or oppose the ability to have force main manure disposal pipes placed in the right-of-way along roadsides without the affected landowner's consent? This is House Bill 1184. Representative Clark.
Thank you. Yeah, we had this bill in committee, and what I can also tell you right now that there's no shortage of liquid manure in Pierre. What this is the temporary hoses that farmers run from their manure lagoons. They run them down the road or down the ditches or right away to their field, directly to the injectors where they pump the liquid manure directly into the ground. And what we did is there is a permit system if a farmer wants to run these hoses along the state highway. And then we then said to the county commission that you maintain the county roads, you decide how you're going to handle these hoses along county roads. And to the township boards, we told them, go ahead and maintain, regulate these hoses the way you see fit. So we turn it back to local control on regulating these hoses.
Thank you. Representative Mickelson.
I'm not sure why, I did sign on to the bill, and I'm not sure why we would need the bill. If you think, you might not know, but the Sioux Falls landfill takes a lot of methane gas, and it delivers that methane gas to the Chancellor ethanol plant. And that's about, 15, 17 miles. And rather than go to individual landowners and say, I want to run this pipeline across your land, they ran it the right-of-way, the road right-of-way. So I would think the county commission, the folks that have the right-of-way would have the ability to decide what would run in their right-of-way and what wouldn't. I think the county commission, the purpose of the bill would say, well, let the county commission decide, and I would think that makes sense.
Thank you. Representative Steinhorn.
Thank you. We've not heard this bill yet on the House floor, but I see it largely as a local control issue. And I think the alternative of piping manure as opposed to trucking it, trucking it is a concern wear and tear on the roads. But I think that's an issue best addressed by the local governing bodies. We like to often bitch about what goes on in Washington, D.C. and how they give us mandates in the state. So what I don't want to do is go to Pierre and then try and take away local control. So I think it's important here that we leave this with local control.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
Okay, it's working. I come from a farm background, and we do this type of thing, and I agree with previous speakers that this is a local control issue, and we really have not had any problems with it. And I believe that our county commissioners are well equipped to handle the situation, and so therefore we'll listen to it over in the Senate when it comes, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Move on to the next question on House Bill 1301. House Bill 1301. Question asks, do you support the commercial use of energy efficiency and renewable projects through PACE legislation as an economic and workforce builder? House Bill 1301. Representative Smith.
As you may or may not know, I am a sponsor of this bill. I do support this bill. It's a permissive bill. It allows counties then to set up a way to finance energy improvements. This is not to be confused with residential PACE. This is strictly for commercial projects, okay? So you're going to hear people talk about the problems perhaps that happen in California with this. This is a commercial PACE program, and I do support that.
Thank you. Anyone else on this one? Representative Nicholson?
You know, I'm vaguely familiar. This is a program that I think the folks that sell HVAC equipment and lighting have brought in other states. And if I understand the program right, if you own a commercial building and you need to do a renovation of your mechanical facilities, then the city or the county could put in place the equivalent of what I'll call a TIF program, and so that the increase in the valuation of the property, the tax increase, you could use to kind of repay for the mechanical renovations. Traditionally, we have been fairly, as a state, over the years, we've been fairly conservative about what we allow TIFs to be used for. So I think it may not be a bad idea, but we need to look at it pretty carefully and just see how it's worked in other places.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
This particular legislation was brought to my attention earlier this summer, and I looked into it a little bit, and one of the things that I particularly did not like about it was the fact that it uses property tax dollars to finance projects for commercial purposes, and those tax dollars are deferred. So it's relatively a new concept within the states, and there are a few states that have adopted it, and there have been a couple of states that have actually rescinded it since it has come into effect. So we're still working and studying on this here type of issue, and when it we'll hear some testimony in committee, and I appreciate the senator to my left, or representative, for at least bringing this forward. It is something to possibly take a look at, but as of right now, I probably would have to disagree with my good friend here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on then to Senate Bill 84. Senate Bill 84 would prohibit governments from entering confidential settlements without involvement of the courts. What are your thoughts on Senate Bill 84? Representative Nicholson?
You know, I'm open to this, and that I really do want to hear the debate on this. Sometimes the public entities, I think current law says if there's a legal matter, a personnel matter, or something that would comprise a business secret, then those kinds of matters that a city government or a political subdivision of the state could keep that confidential. And so I know the Argus leader's been very interested in the panels on the Premier Center, and so I think this bill's been brought as a result of that situation. And I don't know, there was never a lawsuit filed in that case, and so the settlement was ahead of any litigation. And so I think the question is, should that be done in the public, or should that be able to be kept confidential? And I think my view right now is it's probably better off being open in the public and being transparent. But I do want to listen to the debate.
Senator Peters.
Thank you. Well, this was heard on the Senate floor a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, yeah, last week. And this is a hotly contested discussion, the balance between how do you protect yourself personally, how do you protect your business from having all of your business records put up online or out in the open, and then also balancing the government's right for open government. And there's a balancing act here. This particular bill has been amended substantially over the last couple of weeks since it was first introduced. I did vote no on this, predominantly because when I talked to the agencies, Department of Revenue, Department of Labor, and those types of entities, Division of Banking, Division of Insurance, which regulates every one of you in this room, they looked at this piece of legislation and amended it so it would not impact the information withheld at the state level. The problem that I had is what protections in this bill are for the private business and the private citizen. So there's a balancing act that must be made here to ensure that all records are maintained open, yet the balancing act of how do you protect your private information, your private business information, and your proprietary information. And there's a balance yet. I was not comfortable at the time of the discussion on the Senate floor that the private citizen, the private business information was actually going to be kept confidential. And so there's that balancing act out there that we have to be careful of and cognizant of.
I also oppose this on the Senate floor after listening to a lot of testimony, and I wholeheartedly agree with Senator Peters on this issue. It is a balancing act, and a lot of information, I'm afraid, probably would have been released that probably should be held in confidentiality. So I agree with Senator Peters, and I did vote no on this.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? We'll move on to House Bill 1155. House Bill 1155. This is regarding language development of deaf and hard of hearing students. How do you plan to vote on House Bill 1155? Representative Smith.
I will be in favor of this. I supported this, and it is a good step to bridge two different departments that may not communicate as well as they can, and so I will, be in support of this.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Steinhauer.
I happen to be carrying a different bill, so I was in the Education Committee hearing when this was presented. This seems to be a very good bill, and I will most likely vote for it when it reaches the floor.
Thank you. Representative Nicholson.
Yeah, this is, we had a school for the deaf at statehood. So it's actually in the state constitution. So obviously this has been an issue of importance for it to have been written into the Constitution. And we've moved away from the school for the deaf. We continue to keep the property that's called the school for the deaf, but there's no school there. We have mainstreamed our kids. And so the bill, what's in the bill it seems to make a lot of sense. Let's have some milestones. My question would be, what's the board, we have a state board of education, have they not considered this, and what's their input on this matter? Because it's not that often that we as legislators will pass performance criteria in state statute for educational curriculum. Typically that board of education would do that. So that'd be the question I'd ask before I vote on this.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? We will move on to House Bill 1276. House Bill 1276. What is your position on House Bill 1276? Why should homeschool parents get a property tax exemption? House Bill 1276. Representative Peterson.
Thank you. I am the prime sponsor in the House on this legislation, and this is a matter of fairness. There are a number of districts across the state, school districts across the state, who are denying homeschool students and their parents the right to participate in activities that their taxpayer dollars pay for. And so this would be just an equity issue in terms of providing them with a tax rebate so that if they have to do other things, that they would have the funds available to do that.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? Senator Peters.
I'll buy first. So I'm all for allowing alternative instruction for education because students learn differently and in different manners depending on what is happening in the student's life. I have 2 kids, and you can just tell today they're night and day. However, on this particular piece of legislation, it's talking about providing a tax exemption. Now, we fund our education predominantly using property tax, and my kids are at the age where they're starting to graduate from high school, and I'm not going to have students in school anymore. So I'll be willing to wanting to carve out myself too and want to pull out that payment methodology. So I think we have to tread lightly here because we have a lot of senior citizens that are paying property taxes for education, and that's an investment in our society. It's part of what we do. I do understand the argument if you are if you have students in private school, you're already paying tuition, why should you contribute to private school? If you're homeschooling your students, you should be able to get a tax credit there as well. So this is a conversation that is a little bit more complex, then what first meets the eye, and that's something that we have to have a conversation about as far as how it impacts the overall society and the unintended consequences that we need to look at.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
Thank you. All right, thank you. And I'm generally in favor of this bill. However, I want to listen to the full debate, and I want to hear from the school districts as well as the Board of Education on their opinion on this particular bill before I make a final decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Steinhauer?
Okay, you got me in. I have concerns about this bill, and Representative Peterson's got another bill related to the denial of homeschool students participating in activities, and I think that's a topic worthy of discussion. I was happy to help smoke it out of committee and onto the House floor so that we had that discussion. This bill, however, is providing a tax reduction to those that have maybe been denied an opportunity to participate in activities. First of all, you got to establish what does denial mean, and so I think it's wrought with problems in that regard. You know, some of us choose to send our students to parochial schools, some of us choose not to have students, but we all have a vested interest in education. I think we all ought to be paying our share.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
I will echo those sentiments of the speaker from Hartford. The people that choose to homeschool their students have that right, and carving out a tax exemption, though, is not what we need to do. Our job as a state is to provide an education, a public education for students, and that is what we are charged with doing.
Thank you. Oh, we already got you, Representative Peterson. Thank you. We'll move on to Senate Bill 198. Senate Bill 198. And it's also referencing House Bill 1073 in the question as well. This is on campus free speech. What is your position on House Bill 1073 or Senate Bill 198, the campus free speech bill? Representative Clark.
All right, thank you. I am the prime sponsor on this particular bill, and this is the campus free speech bill. And what this bill is designed to do is eliminate any of these free speech zones on all the college campuses. At the same time, it's supposed to notify all the students of their rights and responsibility of free speech and the staff of their rights and responsibilities. There's also a cause of action in here where if someone's rights were denied by the institution, they can take some sort of remedial action against the institution only. This particular bill, 1073, did not pass in committee. We tried to, as they call, smoke it out, and that failed. However, Senate Bill 198 is in the Senate and is due for a hearing next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? All right, we will move on to the next one. This is House Bill 1296, House Bill 1296. I have a couple questions here. I'll read them both. Can you please explain the necessity of this bill? This is on transgender bathrooms. Can you please explain the necessity of this bill? Are there issues that have been reported by schools or students? And another person asks, is this really an issue for the legislature or is it an issue for individual school districts? Is it an issue that students care about or is it the adults in the room that care? Again, it's House Bill 1296. All right, Representative Nicholson.
I shouldn't say anything, but you know, it's interesting that we voted on this bill previously, the governor vetoed it, and then his veto was upheld. And I guess society's changing, you know, and it comes home from school with my kids and we talk about it. And it's not an easy topic, really, to be honest with you. And so the question is, have we had an identifiable problem in this state? And are the school districts not capable of addressing it? And so far, in our school district with my kids, I don't think we've had that problem. And so I suspect this bill probably won't pass, but we'll see what happens. It's.
Thank you, Representative Smith.
Testing here. I oppose this legislation or anything like it. We've dealt with this multiple times. The governor did veto the bill. It keeps coming back and coming back. And I was a teacher. I was a public school teacher. I had students in my classroom that were transgender. We handled it at a local level. We handled it just fine. It's not a new issue. It's going to continue to be in our society, and the schools can handle this. We did a great job, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you, Representative Peterson.
I think it's important to be clear about what the bill does. The bill requires each school board to establish a policy. So what this is doing is really firming up that this goes back to local control. In my conversations with superintendents, both in my own district and across the state, their comments to me were, leave this to the local districts. And that's what this does. This doesn't make a statewide policy for this. This leaves it to the local districts. So I think it actually accomplishes a lot of the things that we're hearing the schools say that they want.
Thank you, Representative Clark.
Thank you. And the way, this is the third year this bill has come up, and I'm going to stand in my initial position that this bill should be handled by local control, and that's what the bill does. It should be handled by the superintendent and the school board. The only thing this bill does is mandate that the school board should deal with this particular issue. And I think it's up to our local school boards to see if they want to deal with it or not, or if there's a problem, they should deal with it, or if there's not a problem, then they can move on with other business. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters.
I would encourage that we not mandate the school districts have a policy in this area. Each school district can deal with this issue on a case-by-case situation. Some school districts might not ever see a transgender child come through their system, and others might have a small population, and so each one is going to have to come up with a different solution. So if we put something like this in a law, most school districts, if they have this situation, they will already have had a policy put into place. So I just prefer not to mandate the local control issue. There is another bill which is in the Senate, Senate Bill 202, which deals with...
That's the next question.
That's the next question. Well, I'll start on it because it's interesting. It actually talks about, and I'm against this as well, but I'm not sure what it's trying to accomplish. The person in charge of maintaining a public restroom is designed or designated for use of multi-persons. So they're going to require whoever, maybe it's the janitor, is going to have to require a sign on the door to flip the switch on whether there's a man in there or a woman in there or other. I'm not sure how that's going to work. So it's an interesting bill. It's written, I think it's written very entertainingly because I just think it's, I don't know why we would need a bill that's going to require, as far as I know, if it's a family restroom, it's already labeled family. It's a men's restroom, it's already labeled men. If it's a women's restroom, it's women. So I'm not sure why we need this piece of legislation, but I'm getting a kick out of the way Senate Bill 202 was actually written.
We'll move on to Senate Bill 202 as well as Senate Bill 160. Those are both on gender identity as well. The questions asked, do legislators realize how much money it would cost to implement these biased laws, including for state facilities? And Senate Bill 160 has to do with instruction on gender identity. This question says, science has proven gender is biological and can be self-identified as young as 2 years old. How can you support not educating kindergarten through 7th grade on factual information that will help them build solid foundation in their identity? So if anyone would like to address either Senate Bill 202 or Senate Bill 160. Representative Nicholson.
That sounds like something that belongs squarely at home.
Anyone else? All right. We're still looking it up. Give us a second here. Okay. Senator Colbeck? Yes, 160 and 202.
Just my feelings on a couple of these are, number one, that a lot of this education on this is very sensitive. Can be taken. This education can be taken at home and taught at home, and then we don't need a mandate. I don't believe there are school districts on subjects like this here. I think that the school boards, and I've talked to numerous of them, are very well aware and know that this is a very sensitive subject, and I firmly believe that they do a really good job of handling situations that occur in each one of their own schools, and I feel that way, and I kind of feel like some of this type of legislation, I probably would not be in favor of it.
Thank you. Representative Smith?
I would just echo Senator Colbeck's comments on that. Our school boards do a great job. Our schools do a great job. And this legislation here is, to me, it's trying to make a problem that doesn't exist out there. It's a solution looking for a problem.
Thank you. Representative Steinhauer?
Thank you, Vice. Being in the House, I hadn't looked at these bills. I'm hoping maybe to go over to the Senate, but I'm a little concerned about what I might be getting into. Some of these bills look like they're just to grab headlines instead of really being serious about public policy. I'm a believer in local control, and got concerns about this bill.
Thank you. All right, we will move on to House Bill 1232. House Bill 1232. This is on dual credit. The question asks, House Bill 1232 removes the ability of school districts to assist students in need to pay for dual credit classes. Do you support this bill? Again, it's House Bill 1232. Senator Pierce?
I'll start. So this particular bill, what they're trying to do is push more of the cost away from the state and move it more towards the person actually taking dual credit classes. Now, in theory, that sounds like a great idea, but it also steps back away from the whole point of and the incentive of encouraging our students to take dual credits. The dual credit, for those of you who don't know, it's dual eligible. You take an English class that qualifies for high school English graduation, but also is also a college English class as well. So if you pass and you get an A or a B or a C on that class in high school, it translates that A, B, or C into college as well. We made this deal to ensure that our kids, our best and our brightest, stay here in South Dakota. It's cheaper for them to pay for it, it's cheaper for us to pay for it in high school than it is once they get into college. So we actually have a couple of kids in Tri-Valley that have graduated out of high school with an associate's degree, or excuse me, graduated out of high school with an associate's degree because they've been able to take advantage of this program. This is really good. If we push more of the cost from the state onto the student taking these courses, it's just going to alleviate the whole benefit of getting kids to stay here. There's a whole lot more I could talk about on this. Plus, it disincentivizes the lower income kids from taking affordable college credit as well. And unless we can have a school district that can afford to help offset those costs, we will disincentivize the lower income folks as well.
Thank you. And Representative Smith?
I would just concur with that. This came through, issues related to this came through the committee, and I know where this bill came from in House Ed. This is a dual credit thing is a great opportunity for the kids of South Dakota. And to make it harder for these kids or their families. That's not what we need to do. We need to help kids get ahead. And this helps our schools, especially some of our smaller schools out there that you know, we're real blessed here in Sioux Falls that we have people that can teach upper level math right within our schools. We have people that can teach, you know, the higher level sciences and things like that. In the rural communities, it's real hard to find those people. And this dual credit allows those schools to do that, and it's a good deal.
Thank you. Representative Nicholson.
Yeah, it costs about $300 a credit hour. The normal class is 3 credit hours, so if you want to take an English class, it's a $900 for the tuition. Now, the way the current policy at the state works is the student's family pays $40 or $50 a credit hour, and then that remaining, let's call it $250, the state pays half, and then the Board of Regents eats the other half, so they don't get reimbursed for it. That's the math. The Board of Regents really is a little bit concerned just because people are getting credit hours and they're, you know, they would rather get the full $300. That's in their best financial interest. From a public policy standpoint, I think you as taxpayers would want us to support this kind of thing because the English class is already being offered. Putting a few more high school kids in the class doesn't add any more cost. And really what's happening is you've got kids graduating from high school that actually have 1 year's worth of college done. And it makes it a lot more affordable for a lot of people. So I'm very supportive of the current PROP system and would not be in favor of this bill.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
Just by looking at it, I'd be in favor of this too, but I think that one thing we've created in our state is our college students are graduating with a lot of debt. And I think this is a good way to get our college students or get them started and going through college. And like Representative Nicholson said, some of those kids are graduating out of high school already with approximately a year of college courses behind them. And I think the less debt that they can come out of college with and get back into our workforce and become citizens and great citizens of the state of South Dakota, I'm all for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is on House Bill 1199 on collective bargaining. House Bill 1199. Please explain how this bill will benefit colleges in South Dakota. Senate Bill 1199. Representative Nicholson.
Well, this was my bright idea. I want to take a step back. In 1969, the state gave collective bargaining rights to every state employee, except administrators, legislators, employees of the judicial system. There are 5 states that do not have collective bargaining at their institutions of higher education. Last year, we took away the right to collectively bargain for our post-secondary technical institutes. And, you know, it hasn't been a big issue at the colleges. I did serve on the law school task force to look at relocating the institution. The faculty representative on that task force was very reluctant to change from teaching 6 credit hours a semester. And there's a provision in the current contract that says once you make professor rank, that 6 credit hours a year is a full-time job. And so my purpose isn't, the Board of Regents do a great job, the faculty does a great job, the mission of the institutions is to educate students, to supply employers with good kids. And there's a lot of things that are cumbersome and not nimble in a 150-page contract that covers 1,500 employees. And only 120 of the 1,300 actually pay dues to belong. So I think it's a conversation worth having.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
I oppose this legislation, and I opposed it last year when we took away collective bargaining from the technical institutes too. I think this is part of a larger plan to degrade collective bargaining in the state of South Dakota, and I do not support this.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? All right. We'll move on to Medicaid funding. I have two bills here, a Senate Bill 190 and a House Bill 1300. Got a couple questions here, I'll read them all. Would you support Medicaid expansion for South Dakotans who lack health insurance? If the funding becomes available, why or why not? Another question asks, wouldn't Senate Bill 190 interfere with timely adjustments to Medicaid programs in case of medical emergency such as an epidemic? Is it reasonable to expect any changes to the Medicaid program to be made with the state legislature approval, considering the legislature meets only once a year? And explain what this bill will do and if there's any concerns. So we have Medicaid expansion. Who would like to start? Representative Steinhauer.
This is like putting a quarter in me or pulling the string on Chatty Cathy, because it's an issue that I'm very concerned about, and it's healthcare. I chair Health and Human Services in the House. I've never worked in a healthcare institution, but I do think I bring some common sense to the issue. You know, 18 months ago, the governor was talking about Medicaid expansion in the state, and he was going to pay for that through savings that we get from the federal government, because the federal government by treaty is supposed to take care of 100% of Native American health care. Unfortunately, we've got limited hospitals. We've got a lot of Native Americans in Sioux Falls, for example, but no IHS facility for them to go to. So what happens? They're duly eligible for Medicaid. They go to Sanford or Rivera or your dentist. We fill out a Medicaid form for them, and the state picks up half of their health care. That's running $90 to $100 million. Well, Medicaid expansion kind of went bye-bye with the election of Trump and changes to the administration at CMS. But we've not done much to save that money. The first dollars were saved, even though the policy changed in February 16th, changed in November. And I believe that we need to be making sure that the money that we save goes first to the existing providers and programs. The existing Medicaid providers are dying. We just had a facility, a nursing home in Tyndall that closed. We've got community support providers that are doing God's work, taking care of our loved ones in our community, but they're not being paid adequately. We need to make sure. And House Bill 1300 takes 30% of those dollars and allocates them to the providers.
That's your time. Anyone else on this topic? Senator Peters?
I guess I'll talk about Senate Bill 190, just because this talks about expansion of legislature, the expansion of the Medicaid program has to be gone through. So the process that we go through, the governor pitches his budget in December. His agencies go through an entire process starting in July all the way through December when the governor proposes his budget. We go through the legislative session and we listen to what the governor's proposing, and then we decide what is available or what changes in the programs we need or want. In doing that, once the legislative session closes, depending on how much money is allocated to the Medicaid program and what program changes in the Medicaid program already is included in our budget process. So if we want to expand the number of slots for rural residency programs, and Medicaid's going to be a part of that, that's included in our state plan change. So the last thing the governor does after we amend our budget, go through the budget hearings, we change the process of how Medicaid is funded, that's when the state plan changes. The Senate Bill 190 says that the governor or the secretary of the principal department administers Medicaid can't expand or amend the state plan unless the legislature deems it so. Guess what? We already do that. So I'm not sure, I'm going to have to listen to some of the testimony on this particular piece of legislation, but right now the department, the way I understand the process, they make state plan changes based on the budgetary process. Now, if this is to curb the expansion,
thank you.
We have to approve the budget.
Representative Nicholson.
This is Senate Bill 190 is a great conversation to have. And in the 60s, the state delegated the authority to provide medical services, food, shelter, heat to the Department of Social Services. And so that's a tremendous delegation of legislative authority. And so really the governor, the secretary of that department works for the governor, and so the governor has a tremendous amount of discretion on this matter. They do have to run it through the budget, but we've got $1 billion budget in social services, so if they save $50 million over on this program, they have the ability to go use it on this other program. Governor John Kasich the governor of Ohio used this authority to make the decision to expand Medicaid really over the objection of the legislature in Ohio. And so I actually would support this just as a way for the legislature to have a stronger voice in that process. And our current governor has said, I would never expand Medicaid services without taking it to the legislature for a vote. So I agree with what he has said, and I think Senate Bill 190 would be consistent with that.
Thank you. Senator, or Representative Peterson.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to House Bill 1300. I think this is a very important bill to make sure that we are taking care of those existing Medicaid providers before we start adding additional services to the list of things that we pay for. We've got to make sure the ones that are already providing services are reimbursed at a rate that allows them to get the employees that they need and provide the services that the state has asked them to provide. So I would support House Bill 1300.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the next topic then, which is Senate Bill 110 on abortion. This is Senate Bill 110. The question asks, Senate Bill 110 requires women seeking legal abortions to be read a series of leading statements. Why can't women be trusted to make healthcare decisions without listening to, and I can't read the last part. I apologize. Senate Bill 110. Senator Peters.
So this bill came through the Senate, and essentially what this bill is doing is meddling into a court case. This wasn't a pro-life or pro-choice piece of legislation. This is inserting findings, legislative findings, into statute. We don't do that traditionally. I am pro-life. I support, if it's a good piece of written legislation, I do vote to support encouraging women to be pro-life. But this particular piece of legislation, to me, I voted against it predominantly because it inserted legislative findings and inserted itself into an ongoing court case on a bill that I supported back in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I can't remember. So this is an ongoing piece of litigation that started back in 2005 originally, and I traditionally don't support legislation that, one, gets involved in litigation unless we're going to instigate the litigation, and then to put the legislative findings into statute is just not something we traditionally do. I think it's a dangerous precedent to set. Even though I am truly passionate, those of you who know me and my kids, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. So I did vote against it, but it's because of the legislative findings being put into statute and names private businesses within the statute. That's dangerous practice to start.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
Well, I voted in favor of Senate Bill 110 and I'm a firm believer that if a young mother can get as much, or a young woman that may be thinking about an abortion gets as much counseling prior to that taking place, I believe that life is very important and it starts at conception. And therefore, I was in favor of this bill, and if we can save 1 or 2 lives because of this piece of legislation, I think it would benefit everybody, and that's my reason I voted. Thank you.
Anyone else on this topic? Representative Steinhauer.
Yeah, I'd just say that I signed on to this bill because I wanted to learn more. You know, the great thing about being in the legislature, it's a constant learning experience. And I've heard about issues related to past legislation requiring notification to mothers contemplating abortion, and that they maybe weren't being followed properly, didn't know enough, and I still don't, frankly, because it's just coming out of the Senate. I learned a lot just hearing Senator Peters speak this morning. I don't know that the legislature should be interjecting ourselves into an ongoing court issue, if that is indeed the case. But we'll listen to the debate, and we'll make an informed decision after we've heard more.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to House Bill 1275. Again, House Bill 1275. This is on the initiative process. The question asks, with the extremely low voter density in very rural districts. Has the legislature considered that House Bill 1275 would make initiatives all but impossible? This is House Bill 1275, and I'll just note I have questions on other parts of the initiated measure process, so we'll stick with just House Bill 1275 on this question. Representative Steinhauer.
I think this is an interesting proposal. Basically what it's saying is that you have to have a geographical dispersion of those signing on to initiated measures. And I don't think it's necessarily to restrict issues, although I do think in truth it would maybe make it a little harder to get things on the ballot. I think what it's really trying to do is make sure that all voices in the state of South Dakota are heard. We like to, in South Dakota, complain about the East Coast and the West Coast having so much influence on what happens here in the hinterland. We have kind of the same thing. We got an East Coast and a West Coast in South Dakota, where if you want to get a ballot initiative, you park yourself outside the county commission and you can get a lot of signatures in a short period of time, but you aren't necessarily representing what people in Mulbridge want. So having a geographic dispersion, I think, is a topic worthy of conversation.
Thank you. Representative Pearson.
Thank you. I think it's always important for the citizens to be able to maintain their right to redress grievances with their government. And in this case, I think it's important that we also ensure that it's South Dakota citizens who are redressing those grievances, not issues from the East Coast and West Coast. And I think this is one more attempt to try to make sure that it is South Dakotans doing that, not outside folks collecting signatures in, high populated areas or high traffic areas. So I think this is an attempt at a solution, and I think we need to keep bringing those forward, and we typically fully vet them, and I think that's a good idea.
Thank you. Excuse me. Representative Clark.
Thank you. Okay, as you know, a couple years ago, we've had some people gathering petition signatures, and they would stand outside the Sioux Empire Fair, and they would go to Rapid City, they would stand out there, they'd get all the signatures, and it'd be done. Everyone in between would be left out. And this bill is an attempt to get everyone in South Dakota a chance to sign on, everyone involved in the process. This is actually an option, a way to do it. Now, if there's some other way that we can do this, I'll be more than happy to listen. But this is a good option to try and get everyone in the state involved in the referendum process. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
I'd just like to be on the record that I oppose this legislation. 1275 may have good intentions, but it's one more piece that's chipping away at the referendum and the initiated measure process. And we had a committee that met this summer that worked on this issue. There are some issues with our process, and they worked on that issue, and they came out with some good ideas. And then there were a bunch more people that brought, and they have the right to do that, but brought bills to try to also work on the process. I'd say we should work with the process, the committees that came out with the ideas. Let's work with those pieces of legislation and see if we can fix that. Those with a larger group of people making those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next one then, which is House Bill 1177. This is again on initiated measures. House Bill 1177. The question asks, this requires a lot of information to the state for both volunteers and paid workers. This seems to overburden the Secretary of State and cause volunteers not to want to help. Is this necessary and why? Again, this is House Bill 1177. Representative Nicholson.
Yeah, it didn't. I think what the bill does was you've got, when you're circulating a petition, you have to have information and contact information on who the sponsor is. Name, phone number, email. And this proposal would just say each one of your circulators would have to have the same information for them as a circulator. So I don't know if that's considered to be too, I didn't think that seemed like a terrible idea. Might be difficult to enforce, but I supported it in the House.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was amended to take out the home address, wasn't it? And, okay, there was a line on there, they need a phone number and email address. You know, this one didn't bother me as much. This bill, it didn't put a lot of onus, but I did vote against it because it was part of a larger whole of this, I'll call it an attack, I guess, on that process. And so I did vote against this one. This one didn't bother me as much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Right, the next one is on House Bill 1196. The question asks, our state motto is under God the people rule. Why do you want to take the power away from the people and make it impossible for them to affect change in their government? This is 1196. Representative Nicholson.
Yeah, that's my bill, and whoever asked the question, I'm happy to visit with you afterward. But no, the bill doesn't do that. There's two concepts that are current state law, and the first is that if you're going to go circulate a petition, you need to be a resident of the state. So if you're from Colorado, you can give money to a ballot committee, but you can't circulate. And then the second is the attestation that you sign at the bottom of the petition says, I personally circulated this petition and I saw everyone sign it. Well, that means it's against the law for the person from Colorado to come here for me to watch and then have me sign as the attester. So all this bill does is say, listen, if you're going to sponsor a ballot measure, then we want you to supply information on each one of your circulators that would provide evidence as to whether or not they are in fact a resident. The information would be kept confidential in the Secretary of State's office and be available if there was a challenge on whether or not the circulators were residents or not. So my only thought is, if you don't have a problem that circulators of initiated measures be residents and actually personally circulate the petitions, I don't know why you would be against this bill.
Thank you. Anyone else on House Bill 1196? We have just a bunch of questions on the rest of the initiated measure bills, including House Joint Resolution 1007, House Bill 1201, 1177 we covered, 1304. The questions, I'm going to summarize this. South Dakota voters are putting issues on the ballot because we're not being heard. Why do these attempts to take away our voice continue? I will let you address the bill that you would like to address in that. Representative Nicholson.
Well, and I think the flurry of activity has left a misimpression. I'm a guy that serves in the legislature, and I actually went and circulated 2 ballot measures and exercised my right as a citizen to initiate. I respect that right. I think it's a wonderful part of our state's heritage, and I'm strongly supportive of it. In my view, it has transitioned to become misused. Okay, we put this in place in 1898 because we were concerned out-of-state moneyed interests connected to the railroads would buy influence in our legislature and we wouldn't listen. And today, we've become a testing ground. 2016 saw $9.5 million on 5 measures, all brought by people that don't live here. Now, they'll pay someone to be their sponsor, so you have a South Dakota citizen serving as a sponsor, but it's basically, they're using South Dakota as a petri dish. Now, 1207, or Joint Resolution 1007, is one that says, from 1898 to 1972, you had the right to initiate, but not to initiate an amendment to our Constitution. This proposal says the people would retain their right to approve any amendment, but not initiate a constitutional amendment. I don't really think we need to pass that, but we need to slow down things like Marcy's amendment that sounded good and got passed and has caused a lot of real problems.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
you know, I'm not going to talk about an individual bill, but I will talk about this topic, and we've touched on it before. Approach it from a little bit different standpoint, though, and I'll take some blame for it. If we had a better balance in Pierre, and the government were more balanced, maybe of the diversity of our state, we probably wouldn't have quite as many initiated measures and referendums that came out. And we'll take some responsibility for that. We got to do a better job in my party of getting people elected to Pierre. But a better balanced government, I believe, would help us all do a better job, and we wouldn't have to worry about these issues as much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Senator Peters.
I guess I'm not going to talk about any specific piece of legislation, but over the 14 years that I've served in the legislature, not to discredit anything that's going on the ballot, but one of the items that I really would like to see is a way for if the public and the citizens are going to initiate a ballot measure or a referendum law or anything, that we have the ability to be able to amend the bill in order to ensure that we don't have unintended consequences. When people were circulating a couple of pieces of legislation this summer, they were circulating a piece of legislation that they had misspelled words and a variety of other things. And the way our current law works today, they started circulating petitions without having some of the grammar corrected. And without a change in our system, as far as making the process better and more accountable, that's what I'm looking for, is to say, I don't want to discourage folks from participating in the process, but we need to find a way to make a common sense amendment to something while you're circulating petitions or prior to circulating petitions, and make certain changes to ensure that there aren't misreferences in code or a variety of other things. So there's a balance that I think we need to find between all of that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Steinhauer.
Yes, I would just add. Is this on? There we go. I would just add that to some of the comments made about concerns. Again, the initiative measure process, the ability to change the Constitution, I think is a very important thing for the state of South Dakota. One of the measures that is being considered is applying some of the same rules that we have for the legislature, and I wish we had for Congress, and that's that every bill only has one topic, because they become too complex. When we have in Congress multiple issues, you never know what they vote for because something's bolted onto it. South Dakota, we don't get to do that. Every bill gets a hearing. When you have complex initiative measures, they'd be easier to understand. I'm not saying that the people aren't smart, but when you have complex issues, it gets to be a tangled mess of spaghetti, and you're head to address one issue at a time. And I think that's worthy of having a discussion as well.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you. Just a comment too, I'm really believe in our Constitution here in South Dakota. And I studied the Constitution through high school and through college, and 66 years living in this state. And I think that Constitution needs to be protected. And this is, again, an issue that needs to be addressed as far as the constitutional amendments being attached to the ballot as well as initiatives. And I think that with some of this legislation, these are things that are being addressed. But I'll just go back to saying that I think our Constitution, I know our Constitution needs to be protected. Our forefathers drew that Constitution up many, many, many years ago, and we've all lived under it, and it's been a darn good document, and I think any changes that are done to it need to be really seriously looked at, and I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
Thank you. I'm not going to speak to any individual bill. I'm just going to the process in general, and that we need to somewhat slow it down. All too often I see referendums, ballot initiatives being rushed. People out there gathering signatures, then it goes back and gets changed, and some of the grammar is wrong. They'll go back and change it again. If the whole thing was slowed down, we wouldn't have a ballot that was 13 questions on it, and hopefully people will be more informed on what is on the ballot before they actually start voting. And another thing, I want to echo what Representative Smith said, is that maybe we're at fault with some of this, that we're not communicating with you as best as we should. And again, you know, my email is out there. Feel free to contact any of us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to House Bill 1286. House Bill 1286. The question states, House Bill 1286 would lower the number of signatures needed to get party status and open every office to nomination by convention. What are your thoughts on this? And it's House Bill 1286. Representative Nicholson?
Thank you. This bill has to do with how big does a party need to be to have a candidate for statewide office or a federal office on the general election ballot. So we know we've got Republicans, we know we've got Democrats, we've got independents. The other two parties in this state that have some size is the Libertarian and Constitutional Party. The current state law requires that 2.5% of the number of people that voted in the last gubernatorial election sign up to form the party, and that they get that much in the election or they have to go reform. This proposal would lower that down to 1%, which is, you know, I think a reasonable idea. But the concept that's not addressed is how many people have to be in the party for it to be a party. Right now, it could be Jamie Smith, party of one, under this proposal, and so that's why I voted against it. Just thinking there needs to be some definition of what constitutes a political party. It can't be just one person.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? All right, we'll move on to Senate Bill 200. Senate Bill 200. This is on refugees. The question asks, several Sioux Falls area legislators signed on in support of this bill. This appears to be against the efforts of Lutheran Social Services in this state. This is all. There we go. This is also a component of workforce development. Do you agree or disagree with this legislation, and why? Again, it's Senate Bill 200, 200. Representative Smith.
You know, I oppose this piece of legislation, and I oppose actually all of the similar pieces of legislation that are brought forward. You know, we're a state that's been built by immigrants. We're a state that, you know, every one of us that's sitting up here, I don't think we have any of us up here that look like we're native peoples to the state of South Dakota. Our families came from somewhere else, and these people are coming from somewhere else. And this legislation just doesn't have any reason, I don't believe, to be brought forward, except for to try to divide us. And I think what we should do instead is learn about our neighbors and break down those barriers and break down those walls of fear.
Thank you. Representative Steinhauer?
Once again, I agree with my friend on the far left. This is a bill that's just goes too far. It says that states shall suspend all direct and indirect resettlement of refugees and refuse to accept chain migration, and on and on and on. It's another one of those bills to grab headlines, and I think we've got more important things to do.
Thank you. Representative Nicholson?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we want to have Senator Neil Tapio deciding what country you need to be from before you can come to South Dakota. Okay, those societies that remain open.
No applause, please. No applause.
Those societies that remain open to other ways of thinking are those that ultimately prosper in the long run. And so, now, there's a legitimate point of view that says we don't want to let in any terrorists. But the tie between being a terrorist and being from these countries is weak. And so I think it's poor legislation.
Thank you. Senator Peters?
I'm going to agree with the counterparts up here.
Go ahead.
Got it? There you go. I'm going to agree with my counterparts up here as well. We have such a low unemployment rate in the state of South Dakota, especially in the Sioux Falls area. We're at full employment, and in order for economic development to work, we either have to have more babies or bring more people in. And I will tell you, our birth rate is not growing as fast as our job growth is growing, and so we're going to have to do something. By passing a piece of legislation that says there's a half a dozen countries that you can't come from is dangerous, especially a couple of these countries actually have very high-performing teachers and engineers that do a lot of good work in a variety of different industries. And so obviously we need to take a look at our immigration policy, but that's a federal discussion to have. And we do need to find a way to protect our citizens against the terrorists that supposedly may or may not be around. But this piece of legislation does not do that, and it doesn't help the federal government. It doesn't help the state of South Dakota either.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
As you guys have followed the legislature, you know we deal with issues like this all the time, and I agree with my colleagues up here at the table that this is probably something that we just don't need to deal with, and I will be against this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to Senate Bill 145. Senate Bill 145. It's on workers' comp. The question states, saying no to this legislation would increase work comp amounts for employers, possibly beyond realistic numbers. What is your position on this bill? And is this bill bad for business? Senate Bill 145. That's what I have, 145. Representative Nicholson.
Yeah, this one I signed up to support. It's hard to understand, and so the headlines aren't going to get into the complexity of the issue. We have what I'll call strict liability in workers' comp. If you're at work and you get hurt, you get paid, but you can't sue over what the amount is. It's all scheduled, okay? There's the ability to sue for bad faith. If the insurance company you allege acts in bad faith, you sue them. This bill would change the process by which you sue for bad faith, and it would leave it at the State Department of Labor, not in front of a judge or a jury. And then it would cap the bad faith amount. And so part of this state's heritage is being really business friendly, and we have very low workers' compensation rates. I've been told we're one of very few states that allows for bad faith claims in the workers' compensation arena. And that's the reason I signed up to support the legislation.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
This piece of legislation, Senate 145, is actually going to be up in front of our committee on Tuesday the 13th, and there is a lot of information being brought forth from both the legal side of it and also from the insurance side of this here issue. One of the things in the bill, it says that they could, the bad faith claim procedure, that they could put a cap of $30,000 on that claim. Knowing what can happen sometimes, $30,000 is probably not a lot of money involved in a major workman's comp claim. So we're listening to the testimony. Myself personally, we haven't come to a conclusion on this one yet. I'm still taking information from both sides. In fact, while I've been sitting up here today, I've had 2 people call me on that on my phone and left messages, which I'll return, and we'll discuss this one. But that it will be up in front of the committee on Tuesday if anybody wants to come and talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We'll move to Senate Bill 91. Senate Bill 91 on the Eastside Veterans Cemetery. Where do you stand on the Eastside Veterans Cemetery is the question. Representative Smith.
I fully support the Eastside Veterans Cemetery.
Senator Peters.
Thank you. I want to agree with my good friend over here on the left. I also support this. I don't know if there's anybody up here that doesn't support this. The piece of legislation as it was dropped has some mechanical issues in it, and it has been sent to joint appropriations to have some of the mechanical issues worked out. The governor's office has come up with some mechanical fixes. We have to figure out a funding mechanism in order to, it's complicated. We get some federal dollars, you have to match it. There's some loan repayments, and then there's maintenance and repair and a variety of issues. So the Joint Appropriations Committee is going to continue to work on this. I know we have been meeting with the Governor's Office and the Veterans Department of Military and Veterans Affairs to ensure that we can come up with a solution in order to get this done. There's some things that we have to do this legislative session in order to get the federal money that we can take advantage of to do this. And so our stepping stones usually go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this particular piece of legislation, we're going to end up going 1, 3, 2, 5, 4 in order to ultimately get to 6. A little complicated way of doing it, but we're going to get there. It's going to be a little bit more complicated. We have to authorize it, then the city has to authorize it, and there's some variety of different moving parts. But I don't know of anybody in the legislature that is going to vote against it at this time, but I know that there's a commitment by everybody up here to get it done in some form or fashion.
Thank you. Representative Peterson.
I fully support the East Side Veterans Cemetery, and there is also another veterans-related bill that we might not be as familiar with, but it will be in front of the Appropriations Committee. I think it might be just House Appropriations, it might be joint. This week related, it's Representative Zipman's bill, and it provides some assistance to our local Veterans Center here that's on 14th and Cliff. I think that's a good bill. It's a small amount of money, and I think that is also something that we need to do.
Thank you. Representative Mickelson.
The Bill Janklow, who's someone that ought to be buried here, is buried in Sturgis. And Bob Jameson, I think many of you would know Bob Jameson. He's also buried out in Sturgis at the military cemetery out there. And so it just makes sense for us to have this kind of a facility. And I do appreciate the work of the veterans groups, because the feds have said, listen, we'll pay for the cost of constructing this, but you have to come up with $600,000. And so that's the matter that's before us, is to find that much money to kind of get this going. And then the question is, what's the cost to maintain and run it? And so I've been told by Ken Tunison that the Catholic Cemetery on North Cliff has 2 people, and that Hill of Rest has 3, which is over by the George Boone Funeral Home. So we just want to make sure that when we're budgeting how much this is going to cost, Senator Peters, we're being realistic, and not going to take 5 or 6 people.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
Thank you. I think you'll be hard pressed to find anyone in the Capitol building who's against this. I think everyone, almost everyone in the Capitol is definitely for building this. And like Senator Peters mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts, and I know a lot of people are working to make this happen. I have full faith that by the end of the session we will have everything done, and we'll probably have all the pieces together, and we will get this thing built.
Thank you. All right, we will go on to our last question of the day, which luckily enough has to do with drinks. We'll move on to House Bill 1308. House Bill 1308. Question states, this poses a per drink tax to fund county and municipal prevention, intervention, and alcohol treatment efforts. How do you feel about this approach? House Bill 1308. Representative Mickelson.
Knock, knock. Okay. This is a proposal to raise the liquor tax 25 cents a drink. Okay? Which I'm like, well, I don't go to the bars that much anymore, but that doesn't seem like that much. Which I know some people think is too much, but they told me it raises $88 million. And half that would go to the state for tech schools, I hope, and half would go to the counties and the cities. Okay? And so I signed on to the bill. I thought, well, let's hear more about it.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
I too want to learn more about this, but it sounds like an interesting funding source. I'd like to see what my good friend to the right of me would like to say about this.
Senator Bowman.
Well, you know what, I've been on the hot seat for a couple of weeks anyway, so I might as well sit here too, They had to put me next to next to my good friend right here. Actually, I'm definitely going to oppose this, and I'm going to tell you not because of why I am in the industry, but because, again, this is a tax increase. The taxes are working class people, or blue collar people that work hard every day to make a decent living for their families. And yet we have to put another tax on something that they enjoy. And I would definitely oppose this. I don't think it's the right means of raising revenue as 88 million. I didn't know that $88 million, that many nickels could be consumed, as we will put it, in the state of South Dakota. That's an awful lot of nickels. So anyway, again, I just say it's just another tax I don't think we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Steinhauer.
Thank you. So, Minnehaha County in particular is suffering with costs of law enforcement and incarceration related to alcohol, and it is a tremendous burden. And I believe that we need more funding to address the issues related to alcohol, both social and civic and governmental costs. I don't like raising taxes. And as I look at, I want to learn more about this bill, but as I look at 50% going to the state, I'm not sure. I'm thinking there may be a little greedy at the feeding trough, because I think the costs are probably more borne by local governments than the state. I don't know what the state is going to do with $44 million to combat issues related to alcohol. There's probably more. They're trying to bribe me. Well, I didn't mean it that way, but they're trying to make sure the money goes someplace where they know I've got a soft spot. But I don't know that $44 million is the need of the state. Maybe 66 million or something, or 75% to the local entities. That's too much for the state, in my opinion.
Yes. Thank you, Representative Clark.
Thank you. Am I on? All right. I'm going to be against this bill, not because I don't like raising taxes, but when you raise taxes this much, 70% of the state's population lives next to a state border. And so if it's too much to spend here, they're going to go across this border and get it. And then we would lose out on that revenue as well as the tax revenue. So I'm generally going to be against this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all. I want to point out these are the questions we didn't get around to. Thank you all for bringing your questions. Hopefully we touched on the topics. Here's a few topics we didn't touch on, and then we will go ahead with closing statements. So if you want to address any of these in your closing statement, feel free. Here's one on the uniform power of attorney, rural emergency services, the compact licensing, homeschool activities, gang patches, a transfer of money from the state veterans home to the general fund, toxicology testing on infants, more on immigration, concealed weapons, a bunch more on initiative and referendums and constitutional amendments, tax on food, more on the deaf education, net neutrality, abortion counseling, LGBT, refugees, tobacco bill, collective bargaining, professional compact licensure, and boy, lots of topics today. We will then go ahead with closing statements on, you'll each have 90 seconds, and we will go ahead and start with Representative Smith.
The first thing I want to say is thank you for coming here and being a part of this today. It truly is great to see citizens involved in this process. It's my second year in my first term in Pierre, and I didn't know what to expect when I got to Pierre. And if you look at this table, it's exactly the ratio of Democrats to Republicans that we have in the House of Representatives. There's 10 of us, and in our corner, and everything that we do as a Democrat has to be done by reaching across the aisle, right? The thing that I was very impressed with, though, when I got to Pierre, is the amount of collegiality that does exist. Okay, you watch the national news and you see not some very good things going on in government. And I truly know that each person to my right on this panel I can reach out and have conversations with. Okay, so I want you to know that about your state government, because as the one guy in the minority party up here, it'd be real easy for me to say and complain about the fact that a lot of our bills get killed on party lines and committees and things like that. But we do work together, and we're doing the best that we can. And again, we thank you for this opportunity to serve our state. And I'll be around later for questions in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this today. It's been very educational and fun, actually. I've had a good time. I just want to talk about, some of the good things that we've proposed and done up there in Pierre. I had a couple of bills I'll just talk about a little bit. One was Senate Bill 67, which had to do with sex trafficking. The victim of a sex trafficked person that would be a minor. If you people follow sex trafficking all in the state of South Dakota, the average age of a sex trafficked person is roughly 13 years of age. And that young woman or that young man, if it may be, they get left behind by the person that has been sex trafficking them, and the John or the whoever you want to talk to, he takes off or she takes off, and they leave these young children stranded here in South Dakota with crimes that they've been convicted of, such as prostitution, maybe alcohol, drugs, shoplifting. What we did was this: we expunged their record when they become the age of 18. They can go in front of a judge and then get that record expunged. So they can become part of our communities and part of our citizenship here in the state of South Dakota and become part of the workforce. And the other one was Senate Bill 94, which had to do with homeschooling. What we did there was we passed in the Senate a bill that would get the ACT score of the public and parochial students at 24. And we made the homeschool students score the same at
That's
24, so they'd both be eligible for those opportunity scholarships.
That's your time.
With that, I thank you.
Thank you. Representative Peterson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve the people of District 13 and the state of South Dakota.
Morning on a Saturday. I greatly appreciate it. We get a lot of emails, but we don't always get to put faces to the emails, and it's nice to see some of the faces of the emails that we do get. I want to close by talking about the budget process. We're 50% of the way through the legislative session. We've heard from the entire executive branch on every agency. And next week we start the process of setting the revenue numbers. As Speaker Mickelson had told you, we only spend what we have. We do not spend any more, which is unusual. As you know from the federal government, they pass budgets and they don't always have a pay-for mechanism. In South Dakota, we set the revenue numbers, and we can only set a budget if the revenue number is X, and we can only spend X. We can't just take out more debt or we make cuts to the programs. Frustrating as that may be for some of us who'd like to see some of our favorite programs, whether it's education or community support providers or long-term care. But that's important to note that we do leave session in the last 4 weeks of session. So next week we set the revenue numbers, and then we work on negotiating with the House and the Senate and the governor's office, and we come up with a budget that's balanced. Constitutionally, we have to have a balanced budget, but I would tell you that we spend the entire legislative session working on the budget. We listen to the governor's office for the first half, and then we listen to the legislators on the second half, and we take in input from all of our communities across the state of South Dakota to come up with what our priorities are.
Thank you. Representative Clark.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming out, especially thank the chamber for putting this event on, and thank our interpreters up here who've been able to interpret and the ums and all those other fun words. When our Constitution was set up, designed to put the power at the lowest government entity possible, and that's your township boards, your city council, and your county commissions. They're the ones that really have the powers, not us at the state or senators and representatives at the federal levels. And I urge each and every one of you to take part in your government by attending these meetings and finding out what's going on in the community, and make sure opinion and your voice heard to your county commission and your city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Steinhauer.
First, I want to say thank you for being here. Thanks to the sponsors for this event. It's always continues the learning journey. I guess the day we stop learning, we're probably dead or know it all. And I know that's not going to happen with me. I want to say that it's a real honor to serve. There's a lot of smart people working for you in Pierre, and it's a citizen legislature. 550 bills, you can't know all the topics, but you quickly learn who's the expert on trains or whatever, and everybody brings their thing to the table, and you know who to rely on to get answers. We've talked a little bit about things like local control. You know, that's near and dear to my heart in protecting us from government overreach and those types of things. One thing that we really didn't talk about is free enterprise, and I'm a big believer in free enterprise. And in 16, we studied nursing homes, which are highly regulated. And while there's not a lot going on in that, there's a lot going on in the alcohol industry this year, a highly regulated industry. And being a free enterprise guy, it's really tempting to just rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of all the regulations and just go crazy with free enterprise. But you know, people have built their business models based on current regulations. And one area that I'm particularly concerned about is House Bill 1067, which deals with farm wineries, and we need to be tweaking those bills. The good news is the process works, though. So while the piece of legislation comes in and you might have concerns about it, people have an opportunity to weigh in. We have a chance to amend things. And by and large, we get it close to right, and we can always touch it up again next year, but it's a good process, good people. Thank you for all being here.
Thank you. We'd like to thank our legislators not only for your contributions to today's coffee, but also for your service to the citizens in the Sioux Falls area. And we do want to thank our sponsors again, the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce, the Sioux Falls League of Women Voters, AARP, the American Association of University Women, Sioux Falls Education Association, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, LEAD South Dakota, American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and the American Heart Association. We also would like to thank our interpreters today, the Interpreting Services Incorporated. And in addition, we'd like to thank the Holiday Inn City Center, USA Media, as well as our great volunteers. And we want to thank you, the audience, for giving voice to your issues and concerns. And we want to invite you back for our final legislative coffee, which will be held not next weekend, but the weekend after, Saturday the 24th at 10 a.m. We'll have legislators from districts 6, 11, and 12. And again, that will be right here at the Holiday Inn City Center. Let's give our elected officials and sponsors a round of applause. Thank you. And you have a great day. Thank you for attending.
Folks, anybody else want to entertain us?
We don't come up here to entertain you. We come up here to inform you.
What kind of morons run this outfit?